All right, this is section 1 of chapter 10, in which we will discuss the properties of non-experimental and quasi-experimental research strategies. All right, so in chapter 6, we identified 5 basic research strategies, and those were experimental, non-experimental, quasi-experimental, correlational, and descriptive. Now, this lecture focuses on the details of non-experimental and quasi-experimental strategies, which are often used in situations where a true experiment is not feasible. So recall, the experimental strategy aims to establish cause and effect relationships by manipulating one variable, the independent variable, and controlling other extraneous variables that may become confounds. However, in natural settings like classrooms or clinical environments, it is often difficult to meet the rigorous requirements of true experiments, in which case you may have to violate those requirements and conduct a non-experimental or quasi-experimental study. That or quit science. Those are your options. So the distinction between these two designs is the degree to which they control confounding variables and threats to internal validity. So non-experimental designs make little to no attempt to control threats to internal validity, while quasi-experimental designs make some attempts to control threats, and so make an effort to approach the rigor of a true experiment while still falling just a bit short. So non-experimental and quasi-experimental designs often resemble true experiments in their structure, but will differ in the way in which the groups or conditions have been created. So like true experiments, these designs will also produce groups of scores for comparison. But the groups are not created by the manipulation of the independent variable as they would be in a true experiment. Instead, the groups are often defined by participant variables, like, for example, how much adversity somebody has faced in their life, or by time, whether you're collecting data from a person before or after some treatment. All right, so I think it may be useful to compare a true experiment to non-experimental / quasi-experimental designs. So again, recall, in a true experiment, researchers manipulate the independent variable to create treatment conditions and then measure participants in those conditions to obtain scores for comparison. If the scores in different conditions differ significantly, it suggests that the manipulation of the independent variable had some effect. So in this example here on the left, this study is examining the effects of violent television on aggressive behavior. So the independent variable is TV violence with 2 levels, the absence or presence of violence, and the dependent variable would be aggressive behaviors. So in this study, researchers manipulate the independent variable by assigning kids randomly to one of 2 conditions: watching violent television or watching nonviolent television. Then aggressive behavior is measured and compared between the 2 groups. And again, this is an example of a true experiment. So let's consider some examples of non-experimental and quasi-experimental studies. So the example here to the right is a study comparing verbal test scores between people who have been to college and those who have not. So you are still comparing scores between two groups, as you would in a true experiment, but the difference is in the way that the groups have been created. So unlike a true experiment, here the independent variable is not being manipulated. You are not assigning people to go to college or to not go to college. Instead, you're finding people that already meet that criteria. So in this case, the groups are defined by a participant variable, college or no college. So this is an example of what is called a between subjects non-equivalent groups design, which compares pre-existing groups of individuals who have not been randomly assigned to these conditions. And finally, let's consider this example here on the right. So in this study, you are comparing depression scores before and after therapy in the same group of individuals. So here, the groups are created in terms of time, either before treatment or after treatment. And this design is referred to as a within subject pre-post design. So you're comparing the same group of individuals on two different points in time. All right, so that's the end of section 1. And in the next 2 sections, we will focus on these 2 categories of designs, the non-equivalent group design and the pre-post design.